everyone. Welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host, Paula Taylor, and this is episode 179. I struggled a little bit with what to call this episode. I sort of knew what I wanted to talk about, but I was going back and forth. So right now I'm going with When Expansion Feels Difficult. We'll see if the title of that evolves as we talk. And I have some examples for this week, but I actually want to start with like the broader view, and then we'll focus in a little bit more. Sometimes I do the opposite. So when those of us who started talking about this so-called 3D to 5D split, not my favorite terminology, but it's kind of what we've settled on. 3D being kind of this denser, more fear-based past way of living that we have been in for a long time. 5D being more expanded, more heart-centered, less judgmental, more unconditional love. There's a whole show on that if you want to go back and listen to me talk about the differences. And we've really been talking about the 5D for a while now. When those of us who started talking about this, and like years ago, Dolores Cannon was talking about what she called the new earth, and that these, like the earth was going to essentially split, and there was going to be what we now sort of a lot of us think of as the 5D and the 3D, and we're going to be on separate timelines. And even me, when I first had started having this information come in, I saw kind of like a railroad track splitting, like these two separate timelines. And I know I did not understand the complexity of what that really meant. I'm kind of doubting that anybody had a true grasp of this. And as we've been going along, one of the things that became fairly clear to me right away that other people seemed to be not as clear on was that this was not a physical shift. So when some people first started talking about this 3D to 5D split, it sounded a lot like what the Christians call the rapture. This idea that people are going to be spontaneously removed from reality and be in a different place altogether. They're going to be taken to heaven or whatever, and the rest of us would be left behind. And in some ways, that would be a lot simpler. It would be a lot simpler if we weren't all sharing the same physical reality. And eventually, I don't think we will be. I think that eventually there will be this sort of shift where there's two completely different dimensions, essentially, of sort of a more 3D existence and a 5D existence. A true 5D existence would not be a physical existence. We wouldn't have physical bodies. So what we're being called into in this time of shift is more access to the 5D. The 5D being this expanded, heart-centered way of living, starting to build systems in that way, I just saw this beautiful Unite the World movement on TikTok, and there's world talk now. Like there are a lot of signs that many of us want to go in this direction of this expansion into 5D. And eventually what I've seen is that we will have less dense bodies. And eventually through evolution, many, 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 probably centuries, I would guess, we will evolve to having different body shapes, to needing less physical sustenance, things like that. Some things that, if you study things like the yogis who just subsisted on air and were able to float, and there's people who've had access to some of these more 5D existence tools than most of us have. Eventually, we'll all have access to more of those expansive ways of being. And that's the 5D word, I guess. But is the 3D, and is the 5D. And all of us who are here right now agreed to be here during this super chaotic time of transition. And I'm not sure that we knew exactly what that meant. I mean, on a soul level, I think maybe we did, but I know I didn't. And I know that this has been way more difficult than I could have foreseen. Way more complex, way more nuanced than I could have foreseen. And so the way I think of this now, instead of like two tracks splitting, is this idea of the 3D as kind of this dense ball that's within this expanded space of the 5D. And we're all in the same physical reality, because if we were truly in 5D, we wouldn't be in a physical reality. And that is proving to be very difficult. And I've been saying for a long time, the energy is going to get dense. The 3D is going to get denser. Another word for dense is fear. There's going to be a lot more fear around. There's going to be a lot more chaos around. And I was saying that, not knowing, because I'm not a predictive psychic, that's not where I live or where I want to live. I don't think we really can predict the future, because everybody has free will, and there's multiple ways things can go, multiple ways the timeline can go. It's really difficult to be in this very dense physical space and still have access to expansion. And there's kind of a running joke that I've seen lots of people talking about how long January seemed. It seemed like it was about 15 years long. And it was very dense. And things remain very dense. And so how do we find expansion when things feel so dense? How do we find love when all around us what seems to be reflected back is fear and density and anger and hatred and all of these things that really at the root are fear, based in fear? So now let me get into my stories, and then we may get back into kind of the broader idea. And some of you have heard this story. I told a brief version of this on TikTok the other day, but I want to talk about the last couple of weeks for me, because I want to illustrate, first of all, how up and down this is. This is truly a roller coaster ride, and it's meant to be. If things were not this chaotic, we would not have as many people seeking spiritual guidance. Because when things get difficult, that is when people start to wake up. There's a reason we use the word awakening. For those of us who've been on this path for a while or a long time, people are looking to us for guidance. And that's something I've been thinking a lot about. I was going to say struggling with, but that's not quite the right term, because I had a very dense January. I was really in that density along with everyone else, and sort of to the point that I forgot how to expand. That's not exactly right. But in my own personal path, because we're always on a path of expansion, if I'm going to hold space for other people, I have to be able to hold an expanded space for them to expand into. So if I'm holding space to encourage people to expand, I've got to be able to expand beyond the space they're holding. That's essentially how this works. It's a very simplified, this idea of the 3D as kind of the core, little like center of the earth is the way I'm thinking of it, like this little like intense core, this molten core that's very dense and very heavy. And in order to extend around that, you have to know that there's space to expand into. And so people like me who professionally hold space for a living and help with energy work and spiritual work and things like that, we've got to be able to hold a larger space, a less dense space, a more expanded space than the people who come to us, so they have space to expand into. And I've been doing that in my treatment room, but for myself, I'm always working to expand further, because again, that is the goal, right? Is expansion. And the more expanded I am, the more space I can hold for people who are looking to expand. And the more we help each other, and the more we can actually create this reality of moving into a 5D way of living. So the other day I was checking in with Jesus, one of my guides, who I just call Jay now. And those of you who've been watching or listening to me for a while know there's a whole story there of me having a lot of kind of religious baggage and not being too pleased to see him, honestly, when he came. And he and I actually have like a whole energetic personal history that I have worked through, that we have we're still working on coming back together energetically. But he remains one of my guides, and he has been for a long time, whether I wanted him there or not, whether I was listening to him or not. And for a while, he was very, very close to me. He and Archangel Michael were like on either side of me, somewhat like riding the roller coaster with me, right? Like we're all in the car together. And as things got denser and denser and denser in January, it felt a little bit like we were going through a tunnel, and I lost my cell reception. And it was very interesting because I was having great information coming in for other people, holding space for other people, but I was having a hard time accessing information for myself. I was having a hard time accessing my personal guides. And this has happened a few times in this process. If you remember me talking earlier last year about the archangel net going down and not having access to my archangels. So I've had times in the past when I've sort of lost contact, and there's always a guide. I always have someone. I've been working with my dragons a lot, but I got really used to having the archangels, and I've had my archangel team, but they have not been as close. One of the reasons they haven't been as close is because they asked me to give them space. They're like, you're asking to manifest all these things. You're asking to manifest this retreat, all of these things. You need to trust us. You need to send us out to do the things we need to do in order to kind of move the energy so this stuff will happen for you. And it was like a leap of faith. It was a little bit of them asking me to trust them. And I did. But what happened was then I couldn't really hear them. I couldn't connect to them. They didn't feel as close. So the other day, I was like, all right, Jay, what's going on? Like, you've been so close to me. We've worked through all this stuff. You know, I've been more trusting than I've ever been. And I feel like you're not here. And he said, well, you need to come meet me. And I could sense him. He was like way up in the celestial realm. And I was kind of like, it's so dense down here. Why don't you just come here? It's going to take a lot of effort for me to expand my field up to see you, because I no longer leave my body. And I am convinced that that's not a safe way to astrally travel, because you do leave yourself somewhat vulnerable. If you're not present, you don't know what's going on. So in order to travel, we need to expand. And I've been talking about this for a long time. Like when we do our energetic sanctuary work, we kind of expand out to the sanctuary, or we draw it into us. We don't like leave our body and go elsewhere. And that takes a lot of training and practice. It takes a lot of repetition, and it takes a lot of attention and awareness to stay in your body and then expand out to wherever it is that you're trying to get to. In this case, it was like the angelic realm or the celestial realm. And he was like, it's really important. You need to come to me. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was resting. I did a lot of resting in January, lying down, sleeping, resting. And I was like, all right, well, I'm resting here. I can do this right now. I can expand out. And I started going through the process of doing that, kind of moving up through my chakras and expanding and expanding and expanding. And it took me a while. And this is where attention and awareness training is really important, because your attention does wander. You have thoughts. You sort of start going down a path, and then you have to be like, oh, nope, I'm working on this. And you keep coming back to that. So depending on how much you practice and how long it's been, like it took me a little bit of a while to kind of get up there, and I was sort of going in and out, and that's completely okay. That's actually part of the process, but it can feel a little bit frustrating, or like things are taking a long time. So I got all the way there, and I was like, what the heck, man? You're making me jump through hoops? That's what I felt like. Why are you making me jump through hoops? And right away, he was kind of like, I want you to feel what you feel like up here. Notice what you feel like. And I was like, oh yeah, this is like, feel really light. I feel really expanded. There's so much space here in this angelic, in this celestial realm. And he said, that is exactly why I asked you to come here, because you were getting so trapped in the density, you forgot what it felt like to expand. You were not doing your own practice of expansion. And it's really more important right now than ever. And then he gave me some other messages that I shared in TikTok, if you want to go back and kind of listen to the message he gave me for both myself and for everyone else. What we're focusing on today is this idea of expansion. Even in the densest situation, we have access to expansion, but it requires some effort. It requires attention. It requires awareness. It requires practice. The first time you intend to elongate your system out of the body, beyond the body, past the body, a lot of times you're not even sure if you're getting there because you don't have the energetic memory yet. It's like muscle memory. So if I'm learning to play the violin, the very first time I hold the violin and the bow, it's just going to feel super awkward. I played the violin for a few years, starting when I was about 8. My body still remembers exactly how to hold the bow, exactly how to hold the violin. I probably would sound terrible because I haven't practiced in 30 years, but that's an example of muscle memory. So exactly like that, we have this energetic memory. And the more practice we have at doing something, the more we are developing these pathways, and we're developing the neural pathways to remember how to do that. When Jay said to me, come and meet me, I was like, I'm so tired and it's so heavy and can't you come to me? And at first it felt a little bit like he was making me jump through hoops. And I was like, why are you making me do this? And it was like, oh, then I realized I have not been exercising the energetic muscles that I need to continue to expand and open and expand and open so that I can access expansion even in the midst of this incredible, dense time that we are in. This time is dense for a reason. And again, I'm not sure that any of us, even those of us who were like feeling into this and doing predictions or kind of knowing this was coming, we didn't know how this was going to work exactly. And so how it works is that even in the midst of the densest density, we have access to expansion, but we have to practice. That is why spiritual practice is so important. That is why energetic literacy and energetic practice is so important, because everything is energy. Everything is vibration. And the more you work with that energy, the more you work with that vibration, the more access you have to expansive spaces when things are dense, to courage when you're feeling afraid, to healing, to clarity, expansion, and harmony, even when things feel muddy and contracted and disharmonious, dissonant. So I'm going to just kind of go quickly through what's happened since then, because again, I want to illustrate this is a roller coaster. This is a contraction and expansion, right? Whenever we have expansion, there's always contraction. That is natural. But what happens sometimes when we get so contracted is that we stop working for the expansion. When women are giving birth, I've never done it, but I've seen it represented a lot. And a lot of times there's a point when they're like, I can't do this anymore. I'm too tired. I'm not going to make it. And they don't really have a choice, right? If you're going to birth this baby, you've got to keep going through the contraction and the expansion and the contraction and the expansion. But when the contraction gets to the point where you feel like you've been pressed in on, that you've been constricted to the point where you don't know where you'll ever find expansion again, that is when it is the most important to do the work of finding some expansion, even if it's just the tiniest bit. So I had this experience with Jay. I got really expanded. I was like, oh yeah, I remember how to do that. So I've been doing that practice at least once a day since that time. I tend to do my practice at night. So sometimes I intend to do it and I fall asleep, and that's okay. Because again, I'm building the energetic memory. I'm building that energetic muscle memory of how do I do this? How do I expand? When the physical world is so dense, and the quick and easy answer for this, it's not easy, it's simple but not easy, is finding the space above your body, so extending out through the head, and then kind of waterfalling out into the field. And again, it requires probably guidance to figure out how to do it if you've never done it. Practice, awareness, all of these things that we've been talking about for the last few months here on the show. I did a whole show about spiritual practice and the 5D, why it's more important than ever. And I didn't listen to my own guidance, but that's okay. That happens. That's the other thing. Giving yourself grace. This is a very difficult time. It's okay that I got stuck in some density because I found my way back out of it again. And even if I hadn't, the path is always there. sometimes the path is not illuminated and it feels like we're hacking our way through the forest with a machete. And when you're already tired, again, when I'm already tired from this birthing process, I might feel like I want to give up before the baby's actually born. But the reward gets greater and greater each time we expand. And that is the other side of this coin. The other side of the density and the fear and the chaos is that there's more space for expansion than we've ever had. There's more space for love than we've ever had. There's more space to release judgment than we've ever had. So right now it is the Gem Show in Tucson. And I've spent the last week-ish kind of in and out of that energy. On Sunday, I spent the day with I call her my ride or die, Jennifer, who I've talked about on the show before. And it's our yearly tradition now. This is our 3rd year of going to the Gem Show together. And it was a really long day because we were going to one show. So people think this is one thing, but there's these shows all over town. They're in all different locations. So the show where my metal bowl distributor is in one place. And then Crystal Tones, who has the alchemy crystal bowls, had a show at a different place. And my mentor, Trish Devney, was playing at that show. So we had gotten tickets to see her in that evening, and we were basically going to make a whole day of it. And the first thing I noticed, we went to the first show, and I got some beautiful bowls. One of them is behind me. If you're here watching the video, I'll tell you a little bit more about her when we get to the meditation. If you're staying for that portion, if you're a member of the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary, get a little bit of inside information about this bowl. So we went to the first show, and we were there for probably 2.5 hours. We went to eat. We came home to my house just to kind of relax a little bit before the next junket, before the next leg of our journey. And right away, I was noticing how expanded and beautiful I felt. All of these beautiful rocks. It's a very expanded space. It can be very crowded. It depends on where you're at. But I had been practicing my expansion. And Jennifer and I tend to do a lot of good expansion together. We sort of help each other expand. And so I was feeling really expanded. And then we went to the Crystal Tones show and had kind of a dense experience trying to get there. This is that roller coaster. Couldn't find parking. Parking lots were going to close before we were going to be done. We were in 2 separate cars. So it was a little bit triggering, a little bit scary, a little bit dense. And we were kind of like, got to the point where we're like, well, we're going to have to just leave early. And of course, everything worked out in the end. And I asked my guides and they said, you're fine. Just make sure you leave by 7:30 because they were going to lock this parking lot at 8 o'clock. And the event was supposed to go from 6 to 8. But we made it in there. So there's the roller coaster right there. We had this big expansion earlier in the day. And then, we were down in the density again. So then we went to see Trish play. And it's always an expansive experience, and I was feeling a lot of activation around my crown. And one of the things that was really beautiful was that it was a very gentle activation. It was this gentle kind of swirling of energy above my crown. And I just felt so much love in that space. And she embodies love, and everybody who was there with this loving intention. And the entire room was filled with bowls. You can go to my Instagram and see the reel I posted of like thousands, I think, probably of bowls in this big conference room space. So they all have this really beautiful energy. And during the performance, I had been hearing a bowl call to me and I was a little bit stressed out. So there's the density again, because these bowls are very expensive. It's an investment to own these bowls. And I talked about getting my first one in Cambodia. Could hear a bowl call to me, and Jennifer and I had like set an intention that it would be below a certain amount of money, because that would be maybe what I had access to at this time, even though anything feels like a stretch. But right there, a stretch is expansive. So while Trish was playing, I could hear this bowl. It was like screaming. It was so loud. And so when we finished, we actually had time. We thought it was going to be 2 hours, and it was about an hour. And so Jennifer said, do you want to look at the bowls? Because I kept looking, and she was like looking with me because she was sitting to the left of me, and I kept like looking around her. And she said, is your bowl over there? And I said, I think so. I can hear it. So I went over, but the noise was so loud. It was like a wall of noise. And I was like, I don't know how do I find the bowl? So I was kind of touching some bowls and playing some bowls. And then I was just like, all right, I need to do what I do when I select rocks. And I just kind of closed my eyes and I let my body turn. And I walked, and then I sort of zeroed in on the shelf, and then I looked, and then I saw her. And she's small but mighty, exactly within the range of price that I had intended. Before I left Cambodia, I saw a bowl that had Sedona Red Rock in it. It was lemon aura quartz and Sedona Red Rock, and it was way outside of my price range. This little bowl is Mount Shasta Serpentine and Sedona Red Rock. And it was such an expansive experience, such a beautiful experience. I went back the next day, brought my bowl, played, connected with a really beautiful soul who I intend to keep working with, who doesn't live too far from me, like had really beautiful conversations, so expansive. He was helping me pack my bowls up and helping me, get my invoice and all of that stuff. And I was feeling so expanded. And it's always interesting to me. You get to this space of incredible expansion and we expand together. That is one of the lessons here. And I just realized that's why I feel like I'm rambling, but that's why I'm telling this part of the story, is that I could not have gotten that expanded on my own. Surrounded by these beautiful bowl beings who hold space for expansion. That's what they do. With these other people who recognize the power of these bowls and the power of sound and the power of vibration coming together. That is what a 5D community is. This heart-centered space of expansion. And then this morning I woke up and I had all of this stuff that was supposed to happen and it didn't happen. Everything got shifted. And I always trust it's for the highest good. And I felt like I was right back in the density again. And I felt some scarcity fears come in and some fears around lack and things like that, because I had some things that were supposed to happen today that were going to be helping me pay for this bowl that kind of fell through. And I recognized, again, this is part of this roller coaster. If we don't have moments of density, how do we appreciate the moments of expansion? When I got home, both yesterday and on Sunday, it's going to make me emotional. I was so filled with gratitude. Gratitude for my friend who has been there for 3 years, helping me grow and grow my business and select these bowls and just doing it out of like love and support and mutual admiration. So much gratitude for the bowls themselves and the vibration of sound and this beautiful event that comes here every year in my own backyard. I had to drive 20 minutes in 2 different directions to have these experiences. So much gratitude for the bowls themselves, for vibration, for my mentor, Trish Devney, for the people that I met over the last few days. It literally brings me to tears. And yet the next day I can wake up and feel in that density again. And I want you to know that that's okay, that is the way that this is going, and it's okay. No one is meant to be in expansion all the time. And anyone who tells you they are is either lying, probably to themselves, not necessarily to you on purpose, and they're doing that work of spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. They're telling themselves that they're expanded all the time and ignoring the shadow and ignoring the density. That is not how we move out of 3D. That is not how we expand. True expansion requires the contraction. I heard somebody say something about a slingshot the other day, pulling back that potential energy of pulling back on a slingshot and then the kinetic energy of it moving forward when you release. That is what the contraction and the expansion is. In order to get to greater and greater expansions, greater space of expansion, we've got to have the contraction, because the contraction is like the potential. It's like that slingshotting. And it's where we see what we need to release in order to expand further. When I bought the first bowl, I spent several days hemming and hawing about whether I could do it, whether I was going to be able to afford it. Where was I going to get the money? What were things going to come in to kind of help me support that? And I just had breakfast with Trish the other day, and I said, I'm feeling called to another bowl. I can feel the bowl, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And she said, you just need to tell the bowls to bring the abundance in so that you can bring them into your space. And I'm not buying the bowls for me. I'm buying the bowls for my own expansion. Absolutely. I mean, I am buying them for me, but I am buying them to expand what I am offering myself and humanity, because there's no difference. And that's the biggest thing we need to understand while things are really difficult right now, is that we have a personal timeline and there's a collective timeline. And the way we change the collective timeline, or there's personal energy and collective energy, you could think about that. Personal vibration and collective vibration. And I've been saying this and I will never stop saying this. The way that we change collective vibration is by changing our own vibration. As soon as I shifted into expansion, amazing things started happening. I found the bowl that was calling to me. It was exactly in the range that I had set for myself, under the range I had set. I met somebody who I felt really aligned with, who has a very similar business, and I felt like we might be able to help each other grow and expand together. As soon as we expand, it lends us to more expansion. And in order to find the next layer of expansion, there's a contraction. And it's this continual process. It's just like breathing. As I breathe in, my belly expands out. My diaphragm goes down. I create expansion in my body. And then as I breathe out, I let go of the expansion and everything comes back in. My belly comes back in, my lungs, everything contracts to kind of get all the air out of my body so that I can bring in new air. When I expel air, when I breathe out, I breathe out a ton of toxins. We breathe out toxins through the lungs, and then I breathe in fresh air. This is a natural process, and right now it is under a microscope a little bit, or it is expanding. It is more intense. That's the word I was looking for. It's more intense than it's ever been. I don't know when that's going to change. And I know the only way through it is to continue focusing on expansion. How do I access expansion? What is my practice? What can I do in this moment? Maybe it's just taking an oxytocin breath. When we were driving around looking for parking and there was all these one-way streets and there was pedestrians everywhere and I didn't know where I was because it's not a place I go to very often. I had to just keep breathing. That was the only tool I had in the moment. That and just sort of trusting that things would work out, that we would get where we needed to go in time, that our cars wouldn't get towed, that they would be there when we got back. And I was asking my guides for help, and I was breathing, and I was there with another person setting the intention of expansion together. Community is going to be the way that we make it through this. It's more important than ever to have support, because we have that personal vibration, right? So when you're in a personal vibration of contraction, if someone else in the community is in a personal vibration of expansion, they can hold the space to help you work through what you need to work through in order to find the expansion. And then maybe they're in contraction and then you're holding the space for them. And then that allows them to expand. And there's this beautiful, that is what exchange is. And it can occur in all sorts of different ways. I paid money for that bowl. That's an exchange of energy. Those people packed thousands of bowls up from Utah and brought them all down. I asked one of the girls, how did you get these here? And she was like, we did it. We packed all these bowls up and drove them down here. That's a huge amount of effort. That's a huge amount of energy. So when people say these bowls are, exorbitantly expensive, this is an exchange. They are made with love. They are made with care. They were transported with love and care. They are held in a space of love and intention. There's an exchange there. And it doesn't always have to be monetary. That is one exchange. Being in a space like my relationship with my friend Jennifer, we hold space for each other. And there's an understanding there that there's an exchange. And one day I have more space to hold, and the next day maybe she has more space to hold. And it's this beautiful, it's the breath, right? It's the expansion and the contraction. We're doing it individually, and then we're doing it as a community. So if you enjoy the show and you want access to a community of intention to hold support for each other, both in our contractions and our expansions, I would love to have you join me in the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary. It's $11 a month. You have access to interact with like-hearted individuals, as well as access to the meditation activation portion of the podcast, bonus episodes like the one I shared last week with publicly, just as an example of kind of what we might do in that space if you wanted to join us, and then other exclusive discounts. You are a being of limitless expansion, and we have access to that expansion even when it feels like we've lost it. With intention, with awareness, we can access even a little bit of expansion, a little bit of relief at any given moment. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening, and I will see you on the next episode of Wind Down Wednesdays. No.